Video 10 of National Jelly Roll Day. Today we're talking about binding, and you will use those 5 strips you had remaining from your jelly roll. And taking your first strip, face it upwards and out to your side. And then the second strip, you're going to face downward and in your lap. And then turn it and sew from one corner to the next, making sure you match those corners. If you're new to sewing, I would suggest pinning them. And I actually chain piece my binding, so then making sure that my previous strip, the yellow one, is not twisted and facing right side up, and lining it up with the next strip the exact same way we did it the first time. And then I just keep going from there. Just make sure your binding strips are not twisted. Smooth them out as you go. And then I have one continuous strip already done, and I take my handy dandy thread cutter by Sunflower Quilts and cut them apart. And then I take my rotary cutter and ruler and I line up my 1/4 inch line on my seam allowance, and I trim that off. And then I take it to the ironing board, press all of the seams open. It helps your binding lay flat. And then from one end to the next for your continuous strip, you just fold it in half lengthwise and press it flat so you have that nice crease on the side. And do that for the entirety of your binding strip. Again, you saved 5 strips from your jelly roll from the quilt top. Don't forget that you have those. Or if you don't like a scrappy look of binding, just cut 5 2.5 inch strips of whatever coordinating fabric you would like. Next, you take your continuous binding strip, and with the raw edges matching, so the folded edge is to your left of your foot, you're going to sew all the way until you get close to the corner. But when you get close, I need you to stop and listen to this best tip ever. Whatever size seam you're making right now, so you take a ruler and measure your stitching to the edge of the quilt, which mine is 1/4 inch. You stop your needle right at the edge of the ruler, where you've measured your seam from the edge of the quilt until the needle. Does that make sense? I hope so. And then you turn your quilt and sew from where you stopped to the tip of the quilt. And you can see it here. And it's a 45-degree angle. And then this helps when you're folding it over. It just helps it naturally lay that way, and it just creates the most beautiful corners ever. And you'll see that a little better once we are hand stitching the binding to the back. And that'll be in an entire different video that I do in actual time, and it'll come up later today. But anyways, you take your binding strip and you fold it upwards towards your foot, and then fold it back down towards your body, and then it just naturally will lay pretty flat for you. And then sew all the way down, just continue around the whole quilt. I suggest using a walking foot. It has feed dogs on the bottom of it, so you have feed dogs on the top and the bottom, which helps pull all of that thickness through. It really helps. If you have one, definitely put it on. And then when you get to the end, this is my last corner. When you get here, you're going to stop with at least like a foot of space between where you're stopping now and where you started before, and then you'll have plenty of binding in a tail. I call it a tail. And then you take that piece that you just ended with, fold it in half back to where you were stitching it, and then you're going to fold it 1/4 inch, which is what my seam allowance was. So whatever seam allowance you were using to stitch on the binding, use that measurement and leave that much space in between the cut edge of the right hand side, where you can see I cut it, and then you open it up and cut only through that top layer, not both layers. You cut the top layer of the strip so that you know it's the exact length you need it. And then you're going to attach it the way we did when we were attaching the continuous strip of binding. So you open up the left-hand side, the one you ended on, lay it upright, and then you take your right-hand strip, open it, make sure your strips are not twisted, otherwise you'll have to redo it and you'll be so sad. And then you line it up just like we did when we were making the one continuous strip, and sew from corner to corner. Pin it. If you need help, please don't be afraid to use pins. I'm just lazy. And then trim off using a 1/4-inch seam allowance. I'm using scissors. And then you press it open again where you attach the seams, or the ends where your seam is. You know what I mean. And then press flat the entire strip from the start to the finish. And then stitch that opening down. And then you're done stitching it to the entire front of the quilt. Come back later today and I'll show you how to hand stitch it to the other side. And that one's going to be a longer video, but I do it in real time for y'all.